the situation that we find ourselves in. Because right now we're dealing with a great deal of fear and anxiety, which is having a really deep biological effect on everyone. And I just sort of was thinking that as I was putting this together, that it would be very, very much of a different talk if it were not for the situation that we're in. And by the end of tonight's class episode, which is actually 39, amazingly, after by the end of this, I hope for you to be able to see that there are amazing biological effects to psychological stress, and then also have a better understanding on how to improve your brain as you get older so that you can preserve brain function and you can age with a very strong brain, which is, of course, something that we all want. And let me share my screen and we'll get started. I wanted to mention that, we're reaching the 40th episode next week. And I've decided that I'm going to start inviting guests to talk about things on a deeper perspective, because we've covered so many different topics. And while many of you know I'm running a business and seeing patients, I might not have all the time in the world to grab these particular guests. So when I don't have a guest, then what we're going to do is, obviously, there's an infinite number of topics, but I really want to focus on some of the core factors, because I've really thought about better ways of presenting the information in ways that you can actually remember them in very clear and direct ways so that you can implement certain things into your life. So if any of you have any ideas or suggestions on topics for experts, I'm of course not an expert in many different topics when it comes to health. Of course, as you know, I love talking about health. I mean, we're at our 39th week here, amazingly, and I love doing these. And I have been thinking for the last several weeks about really if we could then shift this, especially as we're getting a lot more people coming onto the webinar, to really focus in and talk to some really good experts on certain topics. So if anyone has any topics that they really want to take a deep dive into with someone who's an expert in that particular topic, definitely send me a message or leave a comment in the chat box. And as always, if you have any questions, please do let me know. We certainly love to have a conversation here. And just welcoming everybody, Grant, there's several guests, Louis, Linda, Luis, Marsha, Melinda, Pat, Sharon, Sheila, Shirley, Tricia. Welcome, everybody. Okay, so you should see my screen, and I'm going to blow this up a little bit. And I've entitled this Taking Care of Your Brain. And like I said in the first couple minutes, this is certainly one of those topics that, as I said, would be probably different if it weren't for the situation that we are in. And I wanted to go over our pandemic, because there's, in addition to the viral pandemic, there's also a fear pandemic. And I'd like all of you to have a very clear understanding of really what happens to your health when you're dealing with fear and anxiety. So as we know, we're dealing with an incredible amount of fear. And we all know that if we go back in many, many centuries, people weren't exposed to the amount of information and the amount of media that we have today. And as a result of that, we're being exposed to a whole host of new anxieties, because the modern media is focused on getting an emotional reaction to you. And most of that emotional reaction happens because they are placing into your head an idea that something bad will happen to you. And all of these are future scenarios. And we know that no one knows what the future holds. And 2 days ago, I really thought it was completely irresponsible that Dr. Fauci basically said, and I don't remember the exact quote, but he basically said, January is going to be a disaster. So when any public health official tells you that they can predict the future, just don't listen to them, and don't let them manipulate your emotions for something that they have no idea of. And we've spoken about this kind of thing happening, unfortunately, in modern medicine when doctors sometimes say things like, you know, you're going to die in 6 months, God forbid, or they give these numbers, and these numbers often act as what are called nocebos. You know, we know the word placebo, which is where you can take something like a nonsense pill, sugar pill, and you get better. Well, you can also give someone a nocebo by giving them information that creates anxiety, that creates false expectations, because again, no one knows what the future holds. And if we're listening to the media and the news, if we just ask ourselves, are they positioning us into an unknown future? Are they telling us that something's going to happen that they have no idea if it's going to happen? Then they are manipulating your emotions in an incredibly negative way. So anytime anyone is predicting the future, just step back, realize that they don't have control over that, and don't let fear take over. But we all have other fears as well. We have aging is a fear. We have, you know, toxins in our environment. These become fears. We have the fear of the unknown, the fear of obviously the virus that is out there now. All of these become what if fears. And again, even what if fears are future scenarios. And we really need to step back and realize that we have to just place ourselves in the situation that we're in now and realize that we're not necessarily in a real emergency, and think about that. So as this fear continues, this becomes then a vague anxiety as we're overexposed to these fears. And there's a Japanese doctor that influenced part of the discussion here by the name of Dr. Ishiguro, that I attended a talk of his at a conference recently, a virtual conference. And he calls this a silent brain killer because, as you'll see, as we get into the talk a little bit further, these have an incredibly negative impact on your brain chemistry. And this is going to lead to its accelerated aging of your brain, decreased functioning of your brain, so much so that it's actually shifting your brain into a more primitive state, meaning it's going to be shutting off some of your higher intellectual functions. We'll go into that in just a moment. And really just realize that creating anxiety about an unknown future is the best business there is out there. That's how marketers, essentially, one of their greatest techniques is to create an artificial want or an artificial anxiety, and then that anxiety about something that hasn't happened in the future, or a fear that you're not going to be in, or you're not going to be pretty, or you're not going to be stylish, these sorts of things happening. And then they provide you a solution. And that's really the function of business, unfortunately. And my father, who's on the chat, is reminding me of an incredible quote by Yogi Berra. And some of his quotes are incredible. And this is a quote from Yogi Berra. It's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. So he really had amazing quotes. So so really, the business is all about marketing is unfortunately all about creating this artificial anxiety about something in the future and then creating a solution. So it's something to just be aware of to alleviate some of this sense of this ongoing vague fear that becomes vague anxiety, which then becomes this incredible negative health impact. And what about learned helplessness? I'm surprised that I haven't heard people talk more about this. Now, learned helplessness was based on some studies by, I was a psychology major actually in college before I went to medical school. And learned helplessness, there's a very famous psychologist by the name of Martin Seligman. And he did this study, and many of you probably are aware of this, but they took a dog. And it was the most pitiful looking experiment. I remember seeing a video of it. And they put a dog on this grid that shocks the dog. And then eventually the dog just he jumps and then jumps. But eventually he realizes that, he can't jump all day. And so he just goes into a corner, curls up into a little ball, and just allows himself to be shocked because he has learned to be helpless because it hasn't shown to be any impact, any improvement. And I really believe that what's happening now in our society is a form of learned helplessness. And amazingly, I haven't heard anyone, maybe some people have talked about, I actually haven't heard anybody talk about it. I mean, think about, as an example, what's happening in California. In California, as an example, these restaurant owners, they everything's shut down now again. And here it is, they had a shutdown, okay? And then they were allowed to open up. And now they have to shut down again. And the same thing's happening with all these lockdowns. We get this sense that maybe it's better. It's like, oh, the dog jumping up in the air, oh, maybe we're okay. And then we get this sense of hope, and then we land back down, and then we get shocked again. And of course, I'm not suggesting there's any sort of conspiratorial thing going on, but the fact, I truly believe that what's happening in modern society now is people are developing this sense of learned helplessness because they feel like there's nothing that they can do about the situation. And unfortunately, as we're going to learn in just a moment, well, first of all, learned helplessness leads to a sense of apathy, leads to depression, and just those particular states have biological impacts on them that are going to lead to an incredible amount of morbidity, of illness in the future. And it's imperative for all of us to really focus on making sure that we have some sort of control over the situation that we're in. And we do that by waking up, having a purpose, learning something new, making connections with people around us, and all the things that we're going to talk about when we speak about how to keep your brain young. But don't let public health officials and this sort of ongoing thing make you feel like you're in this sense of learned helplessness, like that poor little dog curled into a corner. And unfortunately, I believe a lot of people are feeling that way right now. So when biologically, when it's biologically relieved, when fear is relieved, basically on a biological basis, you have endocannabinoids, natural endocannabinoids released in your system, also GABA and dopamine as well. So you're getting this chemical release that makes you feel better. And endocannabinoids you can supplement with without having to resort to any sort of marijuana or cannabis plant at all. In fact, I spoke about that probably in the episode 15 or 15 to 20 or so, I would say, where I spoke about how to activate the endocannabinoid system without cannabinoids. So you can find that lecture on YouTube. So this silent brain killer, which is what that Dr. Ishiguro calls it, this sort of fear that leads to anxiety, which leads to chronic stress, and all that is basically slowly going to deteriorate your brain. And many of you have heard of what's called the triune brain concept. It's somewhat outdated when it comes to people who are experts in the brain and such. But I think it's a good model to think about, that we have this reptilian brain, which is basically focused on survival. It's in our brain stem. And then we have mammalian brain, which is like the animal brain, and is focused on pursuing pleasure and avoiding pain. And then we have the higher brain, or the human brain, which is focused on higher level thinking and performance. And this is going to play a certain role in just a moment, but I'll tell you right now, basically, that when you are focused on survival, everything goes here and you're incapable of higher level thinking. When you're focused on pleasure and avoidance of pain as a primary motivator, you are also basically decapitating yourself from this higher level brain, which means that when you are stressed, you're not really human. I mean, you are essentially back to being an animal. It really is that simple, and it is that crude, believe it or not, because your higher level thinking, your performance, all that is going It's essentially like you decapitated yourself. And this is happening on a chemical basis. And that's what we're going to talk about now. So let's keep that up there for a moment. And I'm just moving my screen around. Okay. And so the HPA axis, which is we've spoken about before, where we've spoken about this in the past, where you're getting say cortisol release from that's happening in your the adrenal glands. This is a hypopituitary thalamic adrenal axis. And so it's related to what's happening in the brain that then is activating the adrenals, which releases cortisol, believe it or not, cortisol, which is like cortisone. And as a result of that, you actually can get hippocampal atrophy, which is seen in real pathology, like in things like Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease, conditions like that. You can actually get hippocampal atrophy from all this cortisol being released into your bloodstream, in addition to other hormones related to this axis. And that's going to affect learning and memory, spatial navigation, and emotional behavior. And that is therefore going to affect the entire brain. You're also going to get thyroid dysfunction, which is that you can get thyroid dysfunction, which is basically going to affect your energy level and is going to sort of lead to a spiral of decreased energy, increased stress, increased depression, leading to a whole host of problems, and also immunosuppression. And think about that. We're all focused on trying to make sure that our immune system is up and running the way it should be. And we feel like, oh, if I'm eating great and I'm exercising great and, I've got big muscles and all this sort of stuff, then my goodness, I can't get sick. Well, the fact of the matter is that if your HPA axis is overstimulated, you are not going to be able to fight infections the way you think you should fight them. And so there's a lot of what I call lifespan reductionists, I call them, because they relate everything to sort of nutrition and exercise. And there's so many other things involved in your overall health. And when we ignore those, we really ignore them to our own detriment. And it's very, very dangerous for us. And that's why this talk, I believe, is important. So that's just one of the neurotransmitter, more of like a hormone axis than anything else. It's not really technically a neurotransmitter axis, but it's a hormone axis, which is causing problems in the brain. So that's what it can be thought of as a stress axis. And this is sort of the fear axis. And we've spoken about this one as well before. So this is a sympathetic adrenal medullary axis, which is adrenaline, basically. And we've spoken about that at length as well, as that we need to, this is the sympathetic nervous system. It's sort of the active fight or flight response that we all need to have. But if it's constantly activated, we're going to damage ourselves. It's like we're being chased by a lion all day long, and we're getting the same reaction to being cut off in traffic, to a public health official telling you that in a month's time it's going to be terrible, projecting you into an unknown future of anxiety and fear. And that's going to cause you to release adrenaline. Now, we've spoken at length about how you need to activate what's called your parasympathetic nervous system. That's your rest and your recharge. And you do that by 20 minutes a day minimum of active, internally directed relaxation. That could be counting your breaths. It could be yoga. It could be prayer, meditation, anything that's internally directed, not externally directed. So reading a fiction book or watching a movie, that is not going to activate it. The only active relaxation that is externally directed is when you show love to another person. When you go up and you hug somebody and you go and you pet your dog, those are, of course, are externally focused, and those are going to activate the parasympathetic nervous system. But anything else that is mentally and related to your brain that you want to calm down is basically going to be internally directed. So as I said, counting breaths, yoga, meditation, prayer, just literally reciting Psalms for people in the Judeo-Christian tradition, where it really gets you into sort of a sacred space. These are all beneficial ways of activating the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, when adrenaline is running through your veins all the time, your body tenses and your blood vessels tighten, in a sense, for your muscles to get ready to defend yourself to the death. And you release blood sugar out of your muscles because you're getting ready to fight. So you can have high blood pressure, your blood pressure goes up, what's called your sympathetic tone increases, which is basically where you're just chronically, your blood vessels are chronically more tense than they normally would be. High blood sugar you're going to have predisposition to high blood sugar. Of course, this is going to lead to various chronic lifestyle diseases like heart disease and obesity. And more importantly, or not more importantly, but additionally, it locks you into the animal brain. We spoke about that. It's locking you in to this part of your brain because you are in survival mode, which means you have decapitated your human brain, chemically speaking, and you are unable to provide yourself with higher level thinking and performance. And that's happening because it's stimulating the amygdala, which is part of this animal brain. And it's leading to impulsiveness, lack of control, insomnia, all of these things that, of course, many of you are experiencing because of this COVID situation. So I've given you a remedy there. Of course, I know it's easier said than done, but the remedy is 20 minutes. One is obviously disengage yourself from future fear that's unknown. And then, of course, providing yourself with 20 minutes a day of internally directed relaxation. Could be taking a hot bath with candles and counting your breaths and relaxing. But you have to do this. I don't care if you feel like you're perfectly relaxed. It's a human requirement to do that. I was going to discuss that, but I'm not going to, so let's delete that. Now, the pyramidal cells are located throughout the brain, and they're very easy to damage. And they can affect your frontal lobe function, which is related to that human brain. And they're excited by glutamate. So that's why some people feel as though things like MSG, which is a type of glutamate, is going to damage the pyramidal cells. But basically, what happens is when they're overly excited, you get this sensation of lack of follow through, because again, the same thing is happening is you disengage yourself from the human brain. Now, Dr. Ishiguro just wanted, and also leads to mitochondrial dysfunction, of course, but just wanted to include what Dr. Ishiguro does with his patients. He's an expert in brain chemistry and the stress in the brain. This is just his recommendations. Just as this is what he basically calls this sort of low-level anxiety. But for brain protection, things like ginger and vitamin C, magnesium L-threonate, we spoke about that before. It's a form of magnesium. We'll talk about magnesium in just a second, but it's particularly one that crosses the blood-brain barrier. Omega-3, he's recommending krill oil. We'll talk about this in the diet section of this talk. Lion's mane, we'll talk about that. Caprylic acid, which is found in organic coconuts, butyrates, fermented beetroot powder. We'll talk about that as well. Taurine has been known as a protective for the brain. L-theanine, we'll talk about that as well. Just wanted to give you an idea. I'm not suggesting you go out and take this or these doses by any means. Just wanted to give you basically how an expert looks at this. He looks at it from acetylcholine situation. We'll talk about choline in just a minute. He looks at it from a GABA increase. We spoke about GABA happening as an increase when you have a decrease in stress. nitric oxide boosters, which are going to enhance blood flow, general brain energy, which some people like MCTs, which is like this caprylic acid, because it can penetrate the brain and provide you with some energy. Nerve growth, again, we'll talk about this in a second, and brain protection, as well. So you'll sort of get a general understanding of these further in just a moment. But thought it was interesting to just show you what might be on the armamentarium of someone who does this, who's an expert and does this with patients all the time. Okay, let me shrink my screen down a little bit. Okay. All right, so let's close this down. And honestly, I think all of you know what you need to do to keep your brain young. It's really not, it's really common sense. Well, first of all, it's mental exercise. And mental exercise needs to be deep, and it needs to be something that you need to focus on. It's they've done these studies with people who do the New York Times crossword puzzle as an example of mental exercise. There are, different cultures have different ways of doing mental exercise. And this is, of course, is important for all ages. In my culture, since I'm Jewish, this notion of studying the Talmud involves very, very deep, intensive, it's very, very deep, intensive study, and has been shown to help with basically improving your thinking and providing you for a type of thinking that requires deep, intensive work. And so in other words, mental exercise, for it to be effective, really has to be something that you really need to sit down and you really need to concentrate on. And many of you are aware of this book called Thinking Fast and Slow. I think it's still on the bestseller list. It was written by, I believe the guy won the Nobel Prize, I think, in economics, Daniel Kahneman. But in it, he describes that there's two systems of thinking. One is this impulsive, automatic, intuitive, and then the second system, which is thoughtful, deliberate, and calculating. And many of us it's similar to, I believe, similar to what we were talking about before. When we're stuck in system one, for whatever reason that may be, in this case, we're talking about the abnormal activation of this feeling of needing to protect ourselves and having fear, we get stuck here. And when we get stuck here, we're not really capable of making really good decisions. And it's sort of like what we've spoken about, how when we are unfortunately focused on fear and anxiety, we have essentially chemically decapitated ourselves from our higher thinking functions. That's essentially what's happening. So it is important for you to focus on your stress level. I mean, we've spoken about why you need to address your stress level from every other organ system in the body up until now, this being the 39th episode, but we have not really focused on what really happens in the brain. And so that's why I thought tonight's class was important. Okay, well, we know physical exercise does improve the brain. You need to address blood flow in the brain. We saw that with his NO boosters, with the beats. You want to get as much blood flow into the brain, and things like blood pressure, addressing blood pressure, addressing blood sugar, having a diet that is optimized for clean vessels is going to be important. Social connection, super important. Another thing that we're all lacking these days. So it's important for us to reach out as best as we can to try to maintain some social connections. Of course, stopping smoking and drinking and sleep. All of them completely, I would hope, complete common sense. I would, again, focus on this, go back to this mental exercise thing, only because with all the demands that we have now, we feel like we are in survival mode and we just want an escape. And really the solution is not an escape, but to really start to dig in and to exercise our brain as best as we can, whether that's taking up a new hobby or um, learning a new language or something that's going to really tax your higher level brain and get you back into your higher level brain, so you're not focused on survival. Feeding your brain, well, first of all, be careful with super low fat diets. Your brain needs fat, especially DHA, which is found in fish. Now, if you're a vegan, then I recommend that you take a DHA supplement. And if you don't think you need to take a DHA supplement, just because you feel like you don't need it, then I would recommend you get an omega index blood test to see what your omega-3 levels are, because some people have a inability, or I should say a decreased ability, to convert the omega-3s in, say, flax or chia into this DHA, and we need more of it as we age. Secondly, we need to optimize minerals like zinc and magnesium, and most people require zinc and magnesium supplementation. If we have an issue with magnesium, and almost everyone does, unfortunately, then for the brain itself, we spoke just a second ago about magnesium L-threonate, which is a type of magnesium that penetrates the blood-brain barrier and is able to get the magnesium into there. But of course, dietary, we always want to try to optimize. So nuts and seeds, properly soaked nuts and seeds, are going to give you minerals into your diet. Of course, vegetables as well, but nuts and seeds are going to be high in that. So we should all be eating a handful of raw nuts and seeds per day. Dark chocolate is helpful, and choline, which is something that we spoke about. There's a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, and you need more of this as you get older. Now, the issue with choline is, as I said, as you get older, you need more of it, but choline can be difficult to get in your diet. And if you eat too much of the foods that have it, then it might not be healthy. Things like egg yolks and liver, as an example, are very, very high in choline. We'll talk a little bit more about this next week, because there's certain genes that are involved with choline. But if you don't eat eggs and liver on a regular basis, and probably that isn't something probably that most people should be eating every single day in excessive amounts. Cruciferous vegetables have a little bit of choline. And well, again, we'll talk about it more next week, but if you are, say, beans have some, cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, cauliflower, tofu has a good amount of choline. But you can also take betaine as a supplement. There's issues with taking choline as a supplement, but betaine can be taken because it contributes to the formation of choline internally, and you don't have to worry necessarily about that. But we'll talk a little bit more about that next week when we talk about the 10 genes that can be optimized well to improve your health. Okay, so we're coming up on the end of tonight's talk, and I get this question from people from time to time. What about nootropics? Now, nootropics are supplements, some natural and some are synthetic, that can help with brain function. Now, they're very popular in sort of what are called, body hacking circles and Silicon Valley executives who are doing all kinds of things to, not just Silicon Valley executives, but Silicon Valley coders, these people who write the programs that are sitting in front of their computers, with this intense focus, and they're doing all kinds of things, some of which are somewhat crazy, I should say they sound crazy. I'll give you an example. There are many people who are doing what's called microdosing of psychedelic chemicals, so LSD and things, and trying to remember all the different psychedelics right now. There's one mushroom that I can't remember the name, that was just legalized in Colorado, blanking on the name of it. But There are many people who are doing microdosing of these things because they feel it enhances focus and creativity. And so there are many people trying to focus on this sort of thing. Remember, there was that movie Limitless, where the guy took a pill and became like like 10 times smarter than Einstein and was able to do all kinds of different things. And there are many people who have taken pharmaceutical medications. One of the pills, there's a pill that's used for people who have narcolepsy called modafinil, and there are some very high-profile individuals who were taking modafinil for many, many years because they felt it increased focus. Of course, I'm not in favor of any of those sorts of things because I think there are plenty of natural things that if you want to try are certainly reasonable to try. And here's a list of them. Caffeine has been shown to improve performance. Obviously, you have to worry about doing too much caffeine, and there are people who have genetic susceptibilities to being unable to break down caffeine, which can have actually some cardiac side effects. L-theanine, which is found in green tea, and is what monks really liked because it creates sort of a little bit more focus. That's high in, and we spoke about green tea a couple of weeks ago. We spoke about the different types of green tea that are higher in L-theanine. Ginkgo biloba, which is from the ginkgo tree, which many of you have probably seen, and has been known in Chinese medicine to enhance brain function for thousands of years. Lion's mane mushroom is a very popular one these days. Something that I tried, and I tried probably around a year ago with a company that makes it combined with a little bit of mocha, and it tasted really good. It was chocolatey mocha, and it definitely affects your brain because I had the strangest dreams when I took it. So I gave it to my father, and he didn't. By the way, I noticed I sort of felt like I was more focused. So I was excited about it because I felt like it did have an actual effect. My father didn't feel like it had any effect on him, and he didn't get any sort of weird dreams. But anyway, it's very commonly available now, and if you're looking for something to try to improve focus, I think lion's mane mushroom, it has so many other effects that it's good for the gut. It's good for cholesterol. It has been shown to help with actually growing new neurons. It's a very, very, very beneficial supplement to take. You can get it in a powder just by itself or as a supplement in a pill. Probably easier to get it in a powder and just mix it in with a drink, and certainly something to try. Creatine, which has been known for years as something that bodybuilders take to help, but can also help with brain function. And that's something that I've considered, as I mentioned a week or two ago, because there have been so many studies. It really is a beneficial supplement in many ways for muscles, but also for brain function as well. Rhodiola, which is an herb. Ginseng, of course, we know about ginseng. I've spoken about that. I don't remember which week, where we also spoke about rhodiola, about these adaptogens. We spoke at length about chemicals that can be natural plant chemicals that can help with adapting not only to, they work both ways. Like if you're stressed or you're the opposite, it creates sort of an even balance. Ginseng is another one. And then nicotine actually has been shown to improve mental performance, but of course it's addicting. And so certainly not something that I would recommend, but I have heard interviews with people writers specifically, who will buy nicotine gum or nicotine toothpicks, and they'll put them in their mouth that they have 1 or 2 milligrams of nicotine, and they'll start writing with being on nicotine. Some interesting things going on out there for sure. But of all of these, certainly ginkgo biloba, you can buy L-theanine as a supplement, but you could also just drink a matcha or gyokura green tea. and lion's mane mushroom and creatine. All of these, I would say, if it's something that they're all very, very safe and worth trying for sure. So that is tonight's talk episode, and I'm very Louisa May is saying wearing masks is not a helpless behavior. That is an appropriate response. Yeah, I agree. Wearing masks is a necessary thing that gives some people a sense of control. I wasn't inferring in any way that that was a helpless behavior. What I was saying is that people feel helpless, and I'm not saying the lockdowns are necessarily bad. What I'm just saying is that when people are continually told and that they can no longer do something, and then they get a sense of things coming back to normal, and then again they get shut down, this creates a lot of anxiety and a feeling that nothing's ever going to get better, and that creates a sense of helplessness. Wearing masks, of course, is a something that you're doing positive. It's an active act, of course, so it certainly wouldn't be helpless behavior. Linda's, thank you very much. She's saying that this has given her a different perspective. So thank you so much. And then Sheila's asking, what is good stress and what is bad stress? Well, good stress is, just thinking about it from a perspective of basically, good stress is stress that you get through, and then your body has time to basically repair itself. So as an example, exercise is a good stress. You are basically damaging and stressing your muscle, but then you're taking a break and allowing the muscle to grow back even better, even stronger. If you have feelings of continued anxiety where you're not actually, the point is that if you feel as though it's an emergency, when it's not really an emergency, then you're not going to be able to relieve the amount of chemical energy that your body just released. As an example, if you're on the savannah and you're about to be chased by a lion, you get very, very stressed. And then your body gets into the point of an emergency and it runs. And eventually it is going to be a situation where your body actually is expending all the chemical energy that it just released. So think about that. Your body releases all these hormones to be able to get ready to fight this emergency. And then the lion comes and you're basically going to run to get out of there. And that is going to expend all that chemical energy. What if you get cut off by someone in traffic? The only expended energy there is you squeezing the steering wheel and maybe cursing out the guy or girl who just cut you off. That's not going to expend that energy. So obviously there's a difference between, emotional stress and physical stress, but both of them are going to have, of course, different effects on the body. But if the emotional stress is just think about how emotional stress is causing your body to mount a chemical response. And if you're not able to work that off and you keep getting exposed to reacting to things like they're an emergency when they're not really, your life is not really threatened, then that's essentially never going to be good for you. So that distinction is something that I've spoken about, where you should ask yourself, is this a real emergency? Is it a real emergency in the sense that that your life is in danger? That's what you should be asking yourself when you feel like there's stress. So, any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you very much. Again, if anyone has any, you all know how to reach me. Just respond to the emails that you get for this, and I'll be happy to answer any of your questions. And if you have any suggestions about topics for me to get some experts who work on this stuff all the time, then let me know. I have a whole list of people that I'm trying to contact right now. So I look forward to bringing some experts to these episodes, and I look forward to seeing you next week, where we'll be speaking about the 10 top genes that you can actually change and modify for optimizing your health. And you'll see some interesting things there. So I wish everyone a good night. I hope you have a relaxing weekend ahead. And thank you so much for your attention. Have a great night and stay well.